Is climate change a fact or is it still a theory?
Okay, well, there's an important thing to point out here, and people latch onto this when they say, oh, climate change is just a theory. Even scientists will tell you that. In science, everything is a theory. Gravity is a theory. The Big Bang is a theory. That's just the nature of scientific terminology. Um, However, and so I think it's one of the difficulties that scientists have sometimes in talking to the public because they will not express anything with 100% certainty. However, it's as close to certainty as we can get. And part of that, a large part of that relates to the laws of physics that I talked about. We know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, right? We know that. We know that carbon dioxide is increasing. We know that temperatures are increasing. Now, what you will sometimes get is you'll get people who are critics or skeptics or deniers, whatever you want to call them, will say, hey, they, whoever they are, changed the term from global warming to climate change because, they wanted to be able to put, all changes down to this. And it wasn't always warming. Things weren't warming the way that they said it would. Well, there's a couple of answers to that. First of all, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was established in the 1980s. And scientists have indeed been calling it climate change rather than global warming for a long time, precisely because even though the fundamental global mean average temperature is increasing as a result of the increased greenhouse effect, the enhanced greenhouse effect, that can manifest itself in different ways at different times regionally. And the most significant element of climate change is extreme weather events. And they can be depending on various local factors in various different ways. That can be drought in California. You can be having drought in California at the same time as you are having extreme snowfall in the Northeast. And the two can both be a component of climate change. And you'll get cynics and skeptics saying, oh, come on, you're just saying everything is climate change. But there are reasons why that can be so. So why, for example, would you have greater amount of snowfall in Boston in a winter because of climate change? Why would that make sense? Simply because it appears as if, and this gets us back to the thing at the very top of the show, how do declining polar bear habitats affect me? As sea ice declines in the Arctic, so ice is very high in what's called albedo. It reflects the sun's light. As you lose sea ice, you then have much more open ocean. Ocean is dark. It doesn't reflect the sunlight. It absorbs sunlight. That causes greater heating. And not only does that have a feedback effect and cause you to lose more ice, that also means that a greater amount of heat is rising from the Arctic. What that then does is disrupt the wind patterns that go around the Arctic, breaks them up, allows Arctic weather to descend down to the likes of Boston or here in Vermont. And meanwhile, you have the Atlantic Ocean is warming. So you have the cold air from the Arctic hits the warmer, moist air that's coming out of the Atlantic Ocean. That creates an environment for high precipitation, which, because of the air temperature, falls to snow. So that is how, for example, global warming can cause greater amounts of snowfall in Boston. And one of the things we would expect is more extreme winters in, for example, New England, where I am now. So you would have periods of relative warmth, as we've had this last winter, and nothing happens, followed by extreme snowfalls, which is what we had again this winter. So we're not entirely sure why it is that it is the extreme end of things that are affected more than more moderate things. I actually just recently talked to a researcher. I wrote an article about the fact that this one guy's done a study, and he's shown that air turbulence is almost certain to increase as a result of climate change affecting wind patterns and wind speeds. And he's found that extreme air turbulence is likely to increase at a far greater amount than moderate air turbulence. And he said, I still don't know why exactly that is, but it's weather extremes, it's climate extremes that are the things that we're most likely to see, and indeed are already seeing, whether that be long droughts, whether that be extreme rainfall, even in places, whether that be extreme snowfall. We can somewhat predict to a broad sense this region would be expected to experience this region would be expected to experience that. But on a short-term level, how weather reacts to a changing climate is less predictable than how in the long term how climate is likely to change as a result of increased greenhouse gases.
Okay, so climate change is real.
Oh yeah, I mean, everything is falling into place as it would be predicted to happen, right? Wow, if carbon dioxide increases to such a level, temperatures should probably increase to such a level, and that's kind of what they're doing now. Also, by the way, you have a bunch of people say, oh well, the temperature hasn't increased since 1998. That's factually incorrect. By the way, 1998 was an extremely warm year because of a very high El Nino. But it is incorrect to say that the temperature hasn't increased, that there's been a pause in global warming. The last 3 years, for example, have been progressively, 4 years, I think, even, been progressively the warmest on record. So when you have, these temperatures are increasing, and when you have, we're creating these circumstances that would cause temperatures to increase. And when you have all these other changes, for example, species migrating into different areas and so on and so forth, all the evidence is there to say, yes, this is absolutely happening. And if there is an alternative explanation for why temperatures are increasing, if there's an alternative explanation for why animals are migrating, if there's an alternative explanation for why we're having more extreme weather events, if there's an alternative explanation for why sea ice is disappearing in the Arctic, nobody knows what the heck it is. There's no other explanation. It isn't because the sun has increased its output, because that's not the case. It isn't that Earth's orbit has changed, because that's not the case. It isn't because there's been a wobble in Earth's orbit, because that's not the case. These are all the other factors that are involved in causing Earth's climate to change over the long term that it has done in the past. None of that is happening, and the climate is changing at a very, very rapid pace. So if somebody out there is able to figure out some reason other than increases in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for why these changes are happening, a lot of people would love to hear from you.